Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time the question comes to us from Samuel Myers, who asked, "Hey Thor, how different do you think Star Wars would be today if George Lucas took more of a backseat role with the prequels, similarly to what he did with episodes 5 and 6? Do you think the movies would have been more well received by fans, and how might that have affected the Disney era and maybe even the Clone Wars? I don't know, I just thought that would be an interesting topic." And first of all, I think the prequels had a major impact on the Disney era of Star Wars, especially right out of the gate. You just go back to some of the things J.J. Abrams was saying before The Force Awakens came out about how they're going back to practical effects for the sequels, as if they weren't used like at all on the prequels, which is one of the greatest lies ever told or believed. I don't have the numbers in front of me or anything, but a lot of physical sets were built and practical effects were plentiful in those films. In fact, many things that people thought were CGI or must be CGI because of their scope and scale or complexity, things like the pod racing stadium or the arena on Geonosis, for example, they were actually built. And sure, yes, a ton of CGI was indeed used, don't get me wrong here, and some of the crazy things you've maybe heard over the years, like how all clone troopers or all clone armor that you see in the films is actually CGI, that no real armor was ever produced, well, things like that are true. But anyway, my point is that the prevailing thought going into the sequels was that everyone hated the prequels because of too much CGI or too much Jar Jar Binks or because there were politics in it. Which is why, again, you had Abrams and others talking about how they're going back to practical and more traditional feeling Star Wars, whatever the hell that is. And thus we ended up with a rehash of A New Hope. We ended up with nostalgia bait. And so then you also had virtually no politics in the sequels at all as a result of, again, quote-unquote, everyone hating them being in the prequels, which, as I've argued many times before, they're not going into the political state of the galaxy after two previous trilogies had shown the fall of the Republic and then fighting to restore the Republic. That was a pretty stupid move. Avoiding the political state of the galaxy and literally blowing up the New Republic were some of the biggest mistakes of the sequels, and at least to me, lacking all that made the story feel hollow and detached from what came before, and it was done that way, I believe, because of a fear of the prequels. And so, getting back to the initial question, do I think Lucas should have taken more of a backseat role with the prequels? Should others have maybe written and or directed, much like was the case with Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi? And keeping in mind that, to be blunt, who knows where Star Wars would be today without Brackett and Kasdan writing and Kirshner directing The Empire Strikes Back? Who knows what the full George Lucas version of the second ever Star Wars movie might have looked like, and how it may have been received, and how that then changes the course of history. Now, I'm not saying I think it would have been a bad or terrible movie, but I don't know that it would have been as good as what it did turn out to be. And considering everything The Empire Strikes Back did for Star Wars in the long run, that it's widely regarded as the best Star Wars film ever, even better than the original, which is a rarity for sequels. Again, who knows where we are today if it hadn't been that damn good, and it was that damn good, I'd argue, because Lucas did indeed let others come in and do their thing. Which isn't then to say he deserves all the credit, or blame, depending on your point of view, for the prequels. Obviously, any film, especially one the scope and scale of a Star Wars film, is the work of hundreds, if not thousands, of people. But considering Lucas essentially had absolute authority over the prequels, and that he wrote and directed them, it means that, yes, a bulk of the credit, or blame for what they are, goes to him. And so, honestly, should Lucas have taken more of a backseat role on those films? That's a hard question to answer, because I'm someone who has always loved and enjoyed the prequels, but also thinks that, yes, some things could have, if not should have, been better. I do tend to believe that if the right people had been brought in to write and or direct, with Lucas playing Overlord with final say over everything, that the general reception for them probably would have been better. Not that it's as bad as many seem to think or claim it was. I mean, sure, there were or are plenty of people, plenty of fans that did not like the prequels, which is fine, to each their own. But those films were not universally hated, which is usually how the media portrays it because they didn't like the films themselves, or they're just singing Hollywood song because Hollywood does not like George Lucas because he never wanted to play by their rules. And so, in the grand scheme of things, and if again the right people are brought in, I do think there's a really good chance we end up with better movies overall, or films that are received better both by fans and the general audience. And I put it that way because, especially as of late, I've heard some really great defenses made on behalf of the prequels. Defenses that say that George Lucas intentionally made them the way he did, wooden dialogue and all. and that it's actually part of their brilliance. And I know that might sound like a silly argument to some without getting into a full-blown discussion about it, which might make for a good video another time, or it might just sound like it comes from George Lucas apologists who are just going to love everything he's ever done. But there is an argument to be made that, though not perfect, George Lucas did create something truly unique and special with the prequels. That what's kind of cool or even great about them is that they are his films. That, for better or worse, he got to make them exactly how he wanted to make them without anyone else being able to step in and tell him no, or that they should be this or that. That with him writing and directing, we got his, I guess you could kind of call it, completely unfiltered version of the story of Star Wars. And that we wouldn't have entirely gotten that if he had taken more of a backseat role and let others play big roles or parts like writing and directing. Not to mention, with us now being in a day and age where many, if not virtually all of these big, as we now call them, franchises are owned by mega corporations who milk them for all they're worth, who produce content for them instead of create art, who engineer movies for the masses instead of cinema, who let profits drive them instead of passion. Well, it's kind of awesome to think that George Lucas got to tell his story his way, and we got his vision, and just his vision, not what some execs without a speck of creativity in their body thought would sell the best. And so, to start to wrap this up, as I said before, yes, I do think the prequels could have been better than what they turned out to be. I do think they have some flaws that others or other writers or directors may have ironed out. And along with that, I don't think there would have been anything wrong with Lucas taking more of a backseat role. I do think we more or less still get the story he wanted to tell, and the films turn out to be what he wanted them to be. I mean, he obviously still has full control, and others doing more takes some of the pressure or burden off of him, and allows him to step back and orchestrate the whole thing better, perhaps. Though, in a way, or in hindsight, and knowing what the future of Star Wars would hold, that it has become this thing that feels more created by committee to appeal to the masses than inspired by the imagination and vision of one man, I'm glad those films are what they are and wouldn't want them any other way. I'm glad Lucas did it completely his way, and he had the helm the whole time, and I hope he has no regrets. That he's happy he got to do it all his way, even if not all fans loved them, and some gave him quite a bit of crap over those films. And even if, in the long run, those films did indeed have an impact on the sequels, and as I was kind of saying before, I do feel like there was a concerted effort to avoid even mentioning the prequels all that much, or anything from them in those films, in the sequels, that not even the name Anakin Skywalker gets uttered in the sequel trilogy, and that somehow the Force Ghost of Anakin, played by Hayden Christensen, never appears, which I thought was a given going into the sequels. I thought, of course, we would see him and Luke having a conversation of some type at some point, but that didn't turn out to be. And so what did turn out to be, and almost ironically you could say, is that the sequels, being what they were, in part by trying not to be the prequels, made more people come to appreciate the prequels. I have heard so many people say that after the sequels they now go back and watch the prequels and have a newfound appreciation for them, and for what George Lucas did in general with them. Which, in a way, you could say is, well, I'll let George Lucas himself describe what that's like.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about this one. Do you think Lucas should have taken more of a backseat role on the prequels, and how do you think they turn out? Are they better? Are they worse, maybe? Or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video. Just to start your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then ask away. But whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.